Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again to unpack some complex ideas, hopefully find those surprising nuggets of knowledge that really make you stop and think. Today, we're tackling something that's just everywhere in conversations about AI. It's this concept, maybe even this fear around AI hallucination. It's the word we all read for when these large language models, these LLMs, seem to confidently tell us something that's, well, just wrong, factually incorrect, sometimes nonsensical. But what if? What if we're framing this whole thing incorrectly? What if the term hallucination itself is kind of leading us down the wrong path? Maybe these aren't errors in the way we usually think of errors. Maybe it's something else entirely. So our mission today is to explore a really fascinating alternative perspective. We want to move beyond this idea of AI hallucinations and dig into a potentially more profound way of understanding these outputs, thinking of them as divinations. We're going to dive deep into what LLMs actually do, how they work under the hood, how they process all this information.
And really crucially, what our role is in shaping what they give us and how we interpret it. It's about understanding the tool and becoming maybe better collaborators. And guiding us today, we've got insights from two really thought-provoking pieces. Both are by Tech RVL and Ariel Simmons. The first one is called Divinations, Not Hallucinations: Rethinking Truth in the Age of Generative AI. The second one adds this amazing metaphor. It's titled Making Sense of the Infinite, LLMs and the Library of Babel. So if you're ready to maybe rethink how you interact with AI, how you prompt, how you check its work, let's get into it. Let's unpack this. Okay, so let's start right there. This word, hallucination, it feels like it's become the default, doesn't it? The knee-jerk reaction whenever an AI messes up. It gets used to signal something fundamentally broken, like the machine is just constantly making stuff up, almost like it's trying to deceive us sometimes. We see it in headlines, hear it in meetings, and it immediately puts us on edge, suggesting there's this core defect, right? Like a human mind just fabricating things. And it sets up this expectation, doesn't it?
That the AI has some kind of knowledge base, like a person, and these hallucinations are a glitch, a failure of that system.
That framing, yeah, it feels intuitive, but it's exactly what these pieces argue is, well, incomplete, maybe even really misleading. When we slap the label AI hallucination on something, we're instantly saying, this is a mistake, an anomaly, shouldn't happen. It sets this expectation that the AI should know the right answer, and when it doesn't, boom, failure, a deviation. But looking at it that way can actually stop us from really getting what's going on mechanically, Think about human hallucinations. They're usually about perceiving something that isn't there, often tied to altered mental states, a break in how we perceive reality. Applying that term to an algorithm that doesn't have a mind, isn't conscious, doesn't have altered states, it feels like a category error, doesn't it? It kind of biases our whole interpretation right from the start. We dismiss the output instead of asking, okay, where did this come from? The argument here is that the term just misrepresents the whole probabilistic game these LLMs are playing. It hides their actual logic and puts this weird human-like cognitive burden on them. It's almost like blaming your calculator for hallucinating if you type in 2 plus 2 and expect it to give you the meaning of life. The error isn't in the machine's process. It might be in our input or more likely our expectation.
Okay, that makes sense. So if it's not a hallucination, not a mental malfunction, then how should we be thinking about these moments when the AI gives us an answer that sounds so sure of itself, but it's just objectively wrong? What's the better way to frame it? It feels like we need a new vocabulary for these non-human processes.
And that's the big question, isn't it? What if, instead of hallucinations, we started thinking about them as divinations? Now, that shift in language, it immediately forces us to dig deeper, right, into what these AI outputs actually are. Instead of just writing it off as a bug or a lie, divination makes you think, okay, the model is processing immense patterns in data and offering, well, an interpretation, kind of like how ancient diviners looked for meaning in, say, the flight of birds or patterns in smoke or tea leaves. They weren't necessarily getting hard facts, but guidance, interpretation. So thinking divination pushes us to ask, what are these models really capable of? And maybe even more importantly, how can we, the users, get better at interpreting what they give us? How do we harness their real potential? It's really about setting the right expectations from the get-go. Viewing LLM outputs as divinations means we accept they aren't inherently truthful in a factual sense. They're statistically coherent interpretations based on the data they were trained on. Now, this reframing, it's not about making excuses for errors, not at all. It's about understanding the kind of system we're dealing with and then figuring out how to interact with it more effectively. It totally changes our relationship,
Yeah.
From expecting this infallible oracle to, well, being in a critical partnership. An active interpretation process. We stop being passive recipients and become engaged participants, looking for meaning together.
Okay, that's a really crucial shift, a pivot point. Let's unpack that idea more. Because as you mentioned, the thinking is that models like GPT they don't know things. They don't have understanding like humans do. And that really does fly in the face of how a lot of people interact with them, right? Especially if you're new to this stuff. You might imagine this vast internal encyclopedia or this deep comprehension of concepts, like talking to a human expert. So when it spits out something wrong, it feels like a betrayal of that knowledge you assumed it had.
Exactly. And connecting this to the bigger picture, understanding how they actually work is just paramount. LLMs are built on something called a transformer architecture. Now, without getting too deep into the technical stuff.
Please don't, yeah.
Right. But basically, a transformer is a kind of neural network that really changed the game using attention mechanisms. What that means is the model can figure out which words in a sentence are most important for understanding the context, even over really long stretches of text, much better than older models could. So it processes these enormous amounts of data, basically, a huge chunk of all the text humanity has produced. Books, articles, websites, forum discussions, code, you name it. Their core function, the thing they're designed to do, is generate language based on patterns. That's it. When you give an LLM a prompt maybe asking about mitochondria or political philosophy or who won the World Series in 1983, you're not querying a fixed database of objective facts. You're definitely not tapping into some kind of stored understanding.
Right.
Instead, you're invoking what the analysis calls a statistical oracle. It has learned how humans tend to respond to such questions or prompts based on all that training data. And then it calculates the most probable next word or phrase, or actually the next token, which could be a word part in a sequence. It builds the response piece by piece. So it's a best guess. A guess based entirely on probability and recognizing patterns it's seen before. It's not knowledge retrieval. It's not reasoning. It's not delusion either, hence why hallucination feels wrong. It's probability-driven divination. And that distinction is just critical. The model isn't reasoning or checking facts internally. It's predicting the most statistically likely way to continue the text you started, given the patterns it learned. The output might sound incredibly knowledgeable, fluent, authoritative, but fundamentally, it's a sophisticated statistical projection, a really good mimic.
That is such a powerful distinction. Okay, so it's about statistical coherence, not factual accuracy by its very nature. And then this idea connects back to ancient cultures, where divination wasn't necessarily about being 100% accurate, right? It was about finding meaning, maybe finding direction or guidance. This parallel feels really key to why divination might be a better fit than hallucination. It wasn't like trying to predict the lottery numbers, but more like interpreting signs to make a decision.
Yes, exactly. And that parallel to ancient divination is another crucial piece here. In so many cultures, divination, whether it was reading stars, watching birds fly, looking at cracks and heated bones, you name it, it wasn't usually about controlling the future or getting some exact, infallible prediction. The goal was rarely, give me the one true answer. It was more about drawing meaning from chaos, right? Interpreting complex patterns to find alignment or direction, to gain some insight into messy situations, or just to help make decisions when things felt uncertain. Think about things like the I Ching, or even reading tarot cards or tea leaves. The aim often wasn't a definitive yes or no, but maybe a framework, a way to think about things to navigate uncertainty. And modern LLMs, they operate in a way that's remarkably similar. They take these billions, trillions of data points, this sprawling, messy, often contradictory collection of human language, and they transform it into coherent, readable narratives. But, and this is the absolute critical takeaway highlighted in the analysis, what they offer is not truth, it's coherence. And here's the catch, the real danger zone. Coherence, as we're warned, can feel like truth if we're not careful.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. It sounds right. It flows well, so you just
Yeah.
assume it's correct.
Precisely. Imagine asking an LLM for, I don't know, the history of a local landmark. It might weave this beautifully structured, perfectly grammatical story that contains significant inaccuracies or even completely fabricated events. The coherence of it, the smooth language, the confident tone, the internal consistency makes it sound totally believable, even if the factual truth is just not there. Our brains are kind of wired to look for patterns and meaning, right? And LLMs are masters at generating those patterns. They can easily trick our natural discernment if we're not paying attention. So when people complain about AI hallucinations, what they're often reacting to is exactly that. Outputs that sound confident, fluent, authoritative, but are just wrong or made up. But the real problem, the analysis argues, is often upstream. It's rooted in things like giving vague prompts or not providing enough context, or maybe just users asking these machines for something they were never actually designed to deliver in the first place. Certainty. Absolute truth. The model is just giving you the most statistically likely sequence of words based on its training. It's not running a fact check. It's delivering the most probable linguistic pattern, which, given the vastness and messiness of its training data, might sometimes include plausible sounding falsehoods. The divination is in finding that coherent linguistic pattern, not necessarily in retrieving a verified fact.
Okay, this really shifts the focus, doesn't it? It puts a lot more responsibility back on us, the users. And this point really hit home for me. The analysis states it directly. It's tempting to blame the tools, but LLMs are mirrors more than they are minds. So, I think we bear a pretty significant chunk of the responsibility for the quality or the lack of quality in the answers we get. It's not just the AI's fault. It's about how we interact with it, what we ask, what we expect.
Absolutely. Connecting this to the bigger picture, yeah, they're mirrors. They reflect what we put in, including our assumptions, our biases, our lack of clarity. They're these incredibly sophisticated statistical processors, right? That they operate based purely on the instructions and the context we give them. So if we prompt them vaguely, they will answer vaguely. It's a direct consequence of how they work. A vague prompt just opens up a huge probabilistic landscape, so the divination, the pattern it finds, is likely to be less focused, maybe less accurate, more generic.
Like asking, tell me about history, versus asking for specific details about the Treaty of Versailles.
Exactly. The first might give you a random, possibly inaccurate jumble. The second guides the oracle, focuses the divination onto a much tighter set of patterns, increasing the chance of accuracy. And if we treat them like experts, especially if we don't engage critically with what they say, we'll be misled. Because, like we've been saying, they don't understand. They don't have objective knowledge. They're pattern matching machines, super advanced ones, but still. And crucially, if we fail to verify the information they give us, then we're the ones responsible when we take an inaccuracy and run with it as truth. In a way, we're asking for too much without doing our part. The models are just doing their statistical thing, reflecting the patterns in their training data. If our interaction lacks precision or critical oversight, then the errors or misdirections aren't just the machine failing, it's a joint creation.
That's a tough pill to swallow, maybe.
Mm.
But it makes sense. And the analysis makes another strong point about how we've changed our behavior. It feels like the sheer ease and speed of getting an answer from AI has maybe made us lazy. Like we've abandoned the good research habits we used to have.
Yeah.
We get this confident, fluent answer instantly, and we just accept it, forgetting to do the due diligence we would have done with, say, a Google search result.
Yeah, that point about our own behavior shifting is really important. It asks us to reflect, doesn't it? Think about it. Before LLMs were everywhere, the expectation was clear. We had to read, research, and verify. Remember using the internet or even library books for research. We used tools like Google, sure, but usually with a healthy dose of skepticism. We knew the top result wasn't necessarily the definitive truth. We'd cross-check sources, look for different perspectives, try to get a well-rounded picture. We definitely didn't assume the first search result was scripture, right?
Yeah.
Even if it came from a site that looked authoritative.
No, definitely not. You'd open multiple tabs, compare things.
Exactly. We understood information gathering was an active process. It required effort and judgment. So the analysis poses this direct challenge. Why have we stopped applying that same discernment with AI? It's a really profound call to kind of re-engage our critical thinking muscles instead of just outsourcing everything to the machine. The issue isn't just that LLMs can be wrong sometimes. It's maybe that we've become less equipped or less willing to handle that uncertainty or to question the smooth coherence they offer. So the responsibility for truth at the end of the day still lands squarely on the human user, not the probabilistic machine. This lost art of discernment, as you put it, might be the biggest upstream problem, a problem in our approach, not just in the AI itself. We've maybe traded rigor for convenience.
Okay, to help us really wrap our heads around this idea, LLMs offering coherence, probability, not necessarily truth, the second piece brings in this incredible metaphor. It's Jorge Luis Borges' fictional Library of Babel. What exactly is this library, and why is it such a relevant way to think about AI? It sounds kind of mind-bending.
Oh, it is. It's a fantastic metaphor. What's fascinating is how Borges' story describes this universe that is a library, an unimaginably huge library. It contains every possible combination of letters, punctuation, and words. Imagine infinite hexagonal rooms lined with bookshelves holding books of a fixed size, like 410 pages each, and these books contain every conceivable arrangement of, say, 25 basic symbols, letters, comma, period, space. What this means is that somewhere in this structured infinite library, everything that can be written is written. Every true story, every possible lie, every scientific theory, correct and incorrect, every prophecy, every single variation of every book, it's all there.
Wow. Okay. It's infinite possibilities.
Infinite possibilities, yes. But, and this is the absolute key, the vast, overwhelming majority of these books are complete gibberish. Just random sequences of characters, meaningless noise, billions upon billions of volumes of nonsense. Yet buried within that chaos, every perfect truth, every profound poem, every correct answer also exists.
Yeah.
Statistically, it has to. The analysis argues this isn't just a metaphor. In many ways, it is a mirror of the information systems we are building today, especially large language models. Instead of paper and ink, LLMs are built from tokens and probabilities. Those tokens are the basic units, like Borges's letters. Then probabilities determine how they're strung together. So the challenge isn't really access to information anymore. In Borges' library, all information technically exists, but finding it is the problem, right? It's buried. It's similar with LLMs. Access to patterns of information is immense. The real challenge is navigation. How do we navigate this huge probabilistic space to find the coherence that also happens to align with reality, with truth? The Library of Babel powerfully illustrates that just having a massive volume of potential combinations doesn't automatically give you utility or truth. You need a guide, a discerning eye, to pull meaning out of all that statistical noise.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So LLMs are kind of operating within this digital version of the Library of Babel. They're constantly generating text from this space where theoretically every sequence of words could exist, but only a tiny fraction of what they generate is actually meaningful or factually correct. It's like they're just churning out new books based on statistical likelihood without an editor checking for truth.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. Like the Library of Babel, LLMs function on a very similar principle. They're trained on these enormous corpora of human text, all the messy, contradictory stuff humans have written down, and they generate their output based purely on the most statistically probable next token. An LLM doesn't know anything in the way we understand knowing. It certainly doesn't lie, because lying requires intent, which it doesn't have. No consciousness, no understanding, no moral compass. What it does is divine. It calculates the most likely next piece of language based on the prompt's context and the patterns it learned during training. It excels at finding coherence. It constructs sentences and paragraphs that sound linguistically plausible, grammatically correct, often intelligent and informed, but crucially, not necessarily correctness. Just like those poor librarians in Borges' story, hunting through endless volumes of gibberish hoping to find one book with actual insight or truth, LLMs speak from a place where every answer might exist but must still be found and verified by us, the users. They don't retrieve truth like looking up an entry in a factual database. They gesticulate toward it. They create coherent patterns that might align with truth based on the statistical probabilities embedded in their training data. This really underscores that their output is always a probabilistic gesture, right? An interpretation of patterns. Never a definitive statement of fact pulled from understanding. It's a reflection of language patterns, not necessarily underlying reality.
Okay, so if that's the case, what does this mean for the idea of truth itself? Does it just become like a probabilistic inevitability, something that must be out there in the digital library, but it's just incredibly hard to find amongst all the noise? It sounds a little bleak, almost like objective truth gets kind of lost in this infinite sea of possibilities.
Yeah, it's a really important question. Does truth just vanish in this model? The answer is not at all. Think back to Borges' library. In that infinite expanse, truth is statistically inevitable. It has to exist somewhere in all those possible combinations, even if it's drowned out by nonsense. The same core principle applies to LLMs. The potential for truth is always there, woven into the statistical fabric, the patterns the model has learned. If you prompt these systems in enough ways, with enough variations in context, as the analysis points out, you will eventually surface responses that align with known facts, grounded sources, and logical clarity. The LLM isn't making truth up out of thin air. It can reproduce it. It can divine it from the patterns it learned if we guide it properly. But, and this is the absolute key point, this doesn't happen automatically. Truth isn't just passively delivered to you on a silver platter. It's something you have to actively seek, actively extract from the probabilistic soup the LLM sews up. The model provides, let's say, structured chance, a coherent linguistic pattern that could be true. And it's your discipline and iteration that turns it into something meaningful and verifiable. So the truth exists within the potential outputs, but it takes your effort, your critical thinking, your discernment to actually reveal it, to separate it from the noise and the near infinite other possibilities. You have to be the librarian finding the right book. You have to find the signal.
Okay, so if truth is out there probabilistically within this giant digital library of Babel, and LLMs are these statistical oracles, what is our active practical role? How do we actually work with them effectively? How do we avoid falling into that trap of just assuming coherence equals truth? It sounds like we need to become, well, master librarians of this digital library. or maybe master diviners guiding the process.
That's exactly it. To work effectively with LLMs, the mindset shift is crucial. Treat them not as these all-knowing oracles delivering ultimate truth, but as sophisticated mirrors. Highly advanced, but still mirrors. They don't have an independent brain or a fact-checked knowledge base they're consulting. No, they simply reflect our inputs, our assumptions, our biases. If you give them vague input or biased input or incomplete context, that's what the reflection will show. Garbage in, statistically plausible garbage out sometimes. They are incredibly sensitive instruments, amazing at generating coherent text based on learned patterns, but they are absolutely not sources of ultimate truth in and of themselves. Just like a real librarian in that fictional library has to sift through meaningless tomes to find the valuable ones, we too must curate and verify our interactions with AI. And the more thoughtful, the more specific our prompts are, the more coherent, and importantly, the more potentially accurate the result is likely to be. This curation isn't just about asking better questions. It's also about understanding the inherent limits of the mirror and actively trying to refine the reflection it gives back. Your active participation, your critical eye, your willingness to iterate and check, that's what transforms the raw statistical possibility into something genuinely useful and reliable. It really is a dynamic two-way street. And building on that, the analyses offer some really concrete, practical strategies. Things you, the listener, can actually do to become a better librarian of the infinite, a better diviner of signal within structured noise. Yeah. These are actionable steps, moving beyond just passively getting answers to actively critically collaborating with the AI, leveraging its power, but keeping your human oversight firmly in place. Okay, first, multiple angles iterations. This is huge. Don't just take the first answer the LLM gives you, especially if it's for something important. Run your question several times, tweak the wording, and notice the differences in responses. It's kind of like asking a human expert the same question in a few different ways to see if the core answer stays consistent, right?
Or like getting a second opinion from another diviner, maybe?
Exactly. Ask the same core question, but maybe rephrase it slightly. Use different keywords. This helps you triangulate better answers. You're essentially exploring different paths through the model's vast statistical landscape. If multiple variations of your prompt keep leading to similar factual claims, that increases your confidence that you've hit a strong, potentially accurate pattern. It helps filter out the random noise. Second strategy, self-auditing. This one's really interesting and maybe not used enough. Ask the model to critique itself. Follow up its initial response with prompts like, which parts of that answer might be incorrect or unverifiable? Or maybe, could you provide counter-arguments to what you just said? Or even, what are some common misconceptions about this topic?
Wow, okay. Turning the tables on it.
Yeah. It encourages the model to tap into the patterns of uncertainty, caveats, or conflicting information that are likely also present in its training data. It prompts it to reflect on its own coherence rather than just confidently asserting it. It makes the model feel more like a partner in the verification process, not just a source spitting out answers. Third, and this is probably the single most important piece of advice, manual verification cross-checking. Non-negotiable, really. Highlight bold statements, copy, paste, and search. Use the same diligence, the same skepticism you should be using with any other research tool, Google, Wikipedia, news articles, whatever. Confirm the facts, the dates, the names, the claims with external validated sources. An LLM's output is a starting point. It's a lead. It's a suggestion of what might be coherent. It is not the final verified truth.
So never just copy-paste into a report without checking somewhere else first.
Absolutely not, especially for anything consequential, scientific facts, historical details, legal stuff, medical info. You, the human, must take responsibility for verifying its truthfulness. Do not treat the LLM as gospel, ever. Fourth tactic, layered prompting, prompt stacking. Don't expect amazing, nuanced results from a single short prompt, particularly for complex topics. Think of it more like having a conversation or building a structured inquiry like you'd guide a research assistant. Build context before asking for analysis. Give detailed instructions step by step. Guide the model towards the specific kind of divination, the specific pattern you're looking for.
So instead of just write about quantum physics.
Right, which is way too broad. You might start with, okay, first, define quantum entanglement and its key principles. Then, got it. Now explain how that applies to secure communication technologies. Then maybe finally, summarize the main research challenges in actually building these technologies. See, it's this granular step-by-step approach. It helps narrow down the vast probabilistic space the LLM is working in, guiding it much more precisely towards relevant and hopefully more accurate patterns by building on established context. And lastly, maybe most fundamentally, Own the outcome, a sense of scale. At the end of the day, you are the final filter, always. The model can't possibly know your specific context, the nuances of your field, the immediate requirements of your project, your ethical considerations. It just doesn't have that. Therefore, your judgment is the safety layer and ultimate arbiter of truth. You decide what's useful, what's plausible, what's actually correct. Remember that not every answer is the answer. Keep in mind the sheer scale, the vastness of this digital probabilistic library the LLM is drawing from. You hold the final responsibility for making sense of it, for deciding what's signal and what's noise. The LLM is a tool to augment your thinking, not replace your critical judgment.
Okay, so it really goes beyond just learning better prompting techniques. It's a fundamental, almost philosophical shift in how we see this human-AI relationship. It becomes a true collaboration, doesn't it? Where the human brings the essential discernment, the ethical judgment, the context, the verification. We're not just consumers, we're integral to making the AI useful and safe. It moves away from just master and tool to a partnership.
That's a perfect way to put it. What's fascinating here is that these LLMs, they really are profound pattern compressors, and they act as mirrors of human language and thought. They are, in a very real sense, diviners of our own unspoken structures. They're trained on the best and the worst of humanity's collective written output. They reflect back the statistical likelihoods of how we've used language. And because of that, they absolutely rely on us, on our clarity when we prompt them, on our judgment when we evaluate what they produce, and critically, on our willingness to verify and reflect on those outputs. This leads to maybe the most important question we need to internalize. We have to stop asking if the machine is lying. That whole question misapplies human concepts like intent and deception to an algorithm that simply doesn't operate that way. Instead, we need to focus on asking better questions ourselves and designing better rituals for how we interact with these tools using the strategies we just talked about. We have to recognize that what we're witnessing isn't hallucination, which implies this faulty mind. It's something more like the poetry of possibility. It's not prophecy. It's not guaranteed truth. It's pattern offered back to us, waiting to be shaped. It's this incredible raw material that only gains real value and meaning through our active human engagement, our curation, our verification. The power isn't just in the LLM, it's in the discerning human who learns how to wield it wisely. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive has genuinely reframed how I think about AI outputs, moving away from that limiting, maybe even inaccurate idea of hallucinations towards this more expansive and I think more accurate concept of divinations. It really hammers home that these incredibly powerful models are, at their core, statistical oracles. They're reflecting patterns from this almost infinite digital library of human text. And our role in navigating that, prompting effectively, and ultimately verifying the information, is more crucial than ever. We're definitely not just passive recipients anymore. In this age of generative AI, we aren't just consumers of information or knowledge. We are, as the analysis so beautifully puts it, editors, curators, and co-authors of meaning. That's a big shift. This new paradigm really demands a fundamental change in how we approach information. It encourages this dynamic, active collaboration between our human intellect and the pattern-matching power of artificial intelligence. It's about moving away from just passively accepting, towards actively engaging, critically engaging, knowing that our human discernment is the final, essential filter for truth. And this new kind of literacy that's required, it's described as a blend of intuition, rigor, skepticism, and grace. That feels right. It's what we need to navigate this increasingly complex, probabilistic, and constantly expanding digital library of Babel. Because at the end of the day, as the insights emphasize so powerfully, the model doesn't choose the right book from the library. It doesn't automatically separate the signal from the noise. You do. So as you go about your day, as you interact with these tools, maybe for work, for research, just out of curiosity, what stands out to you from this perspective? How might you change the way you prompt? How you verify information? How you fundamentally view the output you get from an LM? We really encourage you to reflect on your own vital role. Your role as a diviner of signal within all the structured noise of this new information age. That's all for this deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.